Roxine, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Roxine takes care of the growth in Cabin DAO, and we'll dive deeper into what does Cabin DAO do, but we'll just straight jump to the juicy questions. So, Roxine, on Thursday, I know Cabin DAO's Media Guild has community calls where you ask community members MMD, which is what made your day difficult, to get context and help them. Since today's a Thursday, I'd love to ask you MMWD, what has been something that made your day difficult? Week difficult?
Yeah, I think with Cabin right now, we're really doing this push on our co-living pass. And so for me, as someone who's doing growth and marketing for Cabin, it's thinking about how much do people know about co-living, and then how do I reach people through our work of saying, okay, do we teach people about co-living, or do we tell people about Cabin right away? So I think I'm having a lot of fun figuring out the positioning of Cabin as a DAO, but then what if someone doesn't know about crypto Web3, but they would be good people in the community as well. So that's my current, made my day difficult, but it's a fun kind of difficult.
That's amazing. So in your Discord spaces on a weekly basis, is there something where you find yourself a lot educating the community about crypto, Web3, and getting down in the basics versus actually in a DAO where you want people to be owners and be self-driven? How is that something that you're tackling?
Yeah, I think with DAOs, there's this idea of, on one hand, someone who's new to the community would have to understand not just crypto and the meta stuff of being in a DAO, but also the purpose of being a DAO. So in Cabin, for example, that's understanding what we mean by kind of conserve, co-live, create. So our little slogan there. And then there's also someone who has never set up a wallet before, who has never done a bounty before. So I think that's something that I found of almost as a core contributor having to parallel process of, if someone is new in the DAO, I would onboard them into Cabin. I'm just writing our email welcome onboarding sequence right now, onboarding them into Cabin, but also if they have questions about Cabin's token or our roadmap and all these things, being able to do that, meet them where they are, not over-explaining or under-explaining based on what they know as well. So there's two things going on.
Right. Amazing. And I think my next question is based on your article, DAO Ownership One-on-One, which is something we've understood that DAOs need owners to succeed. And we've been saying everyone should work for a DAO rather than traditional organizations because, of course, there's a clear advantage. But I feel like then the biggest point of discussion becomes that, majority of the people act like employees and not owners. And in your article, you beautifully spoke about where this problem stems from, that, school never trained us to think like owners. It trained us to be this obedient work bee. And being an employee gives us the comfort to, clock out at 5:30 p.m., get paid for a job without being accountable for business result. And studies too show that, 50% of startups and businesses fail. That clearly talks about somewhere that not everyone is ready to be an owner. So I feel like that my question to you would be that, does that mean that majority of the people aren't ready to, work in Web3? And then that follow-up question would be, will most DAOs and then don't succeed?
Yeah. Once I answer the first question, I might need you to repeat the second question.
Yes.
Because there's a lot going on there. I think everyone should at least try working in a DAO. I don't know if everyone should be full-time in a DAO right now, because there's so much stuff that we haven't figured out. If I were to pull an analogy, it would be very similar to the beginnings of the computer and internet age. Of working at Apple was a huge risk at that time. Working at Microsoft was a huge risk. Once you hit 2000, 2001, 2002, even working at Amazon was still a huge risk. So I think everyone should try. If there's an opportunity to do a bounty, if there's an opportunity to put in some of their free time into a community that they really enjoy doing, then they should definitely give it a try. But I'm a full-time contributor at Cabin, and not everyone, has the opportunity to do that, but not everyone also maybe is in a life stage where they're able to do that, if that's a bigger risk for them to take. And I think with ownership, in the article, I think I talked about it's a mindset that people have to develop. And I think that's where we have to come into it thinking that ownership isn't just, okay, I'm either born with it or not. It's a skill that we have to develop in ourselves, especially because school never taught us how to do that. Um, yeah, so for me, my parents are business owners. So even from a young age, even though school never taught me, it was something that they kind of drilled into me of if you're working at a job, treat it as if you are the owner. So I've had a little bit of that background for a while now. So then when I got into Cabin, where I am a part of the community and do own token in it, then I'm able to come into it and say, okay, this is what I want to do, what I can do, and do so much more than I've had in my Web 2 jobs as well. Yeah, so everyone should definitely dip their toes into DAOs and try to start developing that ownership mentality. And not just ownership of a community or a single job, but maybe even ownership of their own careers, because that's something that DAO unlocks for us is being able to have a career in like different DAOs and then having that portfolio of work versus just one place.
Thank you. I think I loved that analogy of course, it was super uncertain even in the early days to work for a company like Apple or Microsoft, because at that point, these technologies just did not mature and there was still so much ambiguity. So, and even in your article, I think there was a great quote, which I feel like is a super important quote even for the community that, easy choices, hard life, and hard choices, easy life. So I think my follow up question would be pertaining to Cabin DAO. How has your journey been from finding to developing to empowering and cultivating this owner mindset in your community members, which is the key to decentralization, sustainable decentralization, because DAOs, the autonomous, is like that much in nature. And people are different online versus from real life. So has it been a challenge for you to make people care about the mission of decentralized cities, from people just wanting to live in a cool cabin?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really varies. There are some people who um, they they can come into Cabin with a sense of purpose. Like they really want to be part of the purpose. Um, and for them, they might already come with a set of skills that is super valuable to Cabin. And then almost the relationship becomes like a freelancer consulting relationship where we have a problem in Cabin that you've solved for in your career. Please help us solve this. And then we just hand it off. And then there's the other side of people who they just love the community. Their skills might be like we don't have the need for their skills right now, but they're just investing into the community. So that's a different kind of ownership mentality of they just love the community and give to it so much. So I think in terms of developing the mentality in folks, um, it's been an interesting journey of me figuring out, okay, how much time do I give to developing ownership and time versus how much time do I actually do my job and find someone who can do the job.
Yeah.
So the way I think about it is there's context, giving someone context about the DAO, giving someone context about where the DAO is at this point in time, and then once there's a project, thinking about, okay, talking to them one-on-one and then saying, okay, what skills do you have? What skills do you want to develop or what do you want to do? And then going into it and saying, okay, these are the projects that we have. I think you'd be a good fit for this specific project. So I think once we get to that almost between the macro and the micro level of we're talking about projects now, it becomes very similar to almost like a freelancing consulting relationship where as the person who has the most context, like I'm trying to give this person as much I keep saying context, but context about where the project lies
Yeah.
within our roadmap, talking about why we're doing this, so that they are super well equipped to do an amazing job at it. Yeah, so I've worked with our writers, I've worked with our designers, and it's always like I give them an SOP. If they're a writer, I might even have a template for the article. If they're a designer, I would give them our exact the hex code for the colors and all these things and what we like and what we don't like. So it's really as much as I can giving people all the tools and all the knowledge and all the context they need to really do a really great job for Cabin.
That's amazing. And just piggybacking off of that question about ownership, um, like a lot of majority of the people aren't ready to be owners, right? And for DAOs to sustainably be decentralized, a lot of people need that mentality, like, if I'm not doing my job, like no one else is doing it and we're gonna fail, right? So when majority of the people don't have it, do you feel like in nature it's very challenging for DAOs to exist until they have like most number of owners in a community?
I definitely think so. I think when we talk about it, it's a very human thing to talk about the benefits and the pros of decentralization and autonomy without talking about the cons or the responsibilities required. I could bring up the Spider-Man quote, but I won't. And yeah, if we want almost the privilege of autonomy, then we need to pick up the other side, which is the responsibility of accountability.
Absolutely.
And on one hand, the DAO has to be the place where there's almost this like an SOP or a thing where everyone is accountable for a specific metric or everyone is accountable for finishing a project and having that be super clear. And that's when we're able to say, okay, you can have autonomy on how you do this bounty or how you solve this problem because we can map it exactly to a measurement or a statistic that grows the DAO that everyone else in the DAO has agreed is a very valuable metric or measurement to grow. So in terms of not being ready to be owners, I think it's both sides of there's like for DAOs because we're so new, not all of us have figured out that structure of what's important, what numbers are important to us. How do we build accountability into all the work that we're doing and all the bounties that we're doing? And on the other side, for us as contributors to DAOs, it's also thinking about how do I push the community to be accountable, because it's easy not to be accountable for things. It's easy to just write a proposal or a bounty about something I want to work on, but that might not necessarily be beneficial to the DAO. So I think it's both sides, and that's kind of where we're struggling, or a lot of community are struggling right now, because on one hand, there's no structure from the DAO, and on the other hand, for us, we don't know as contributors how to ask for that structure, or sometimes we don't even want to have that accountability or structure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like so greatly shared, right? Like with great power comes great responsibility. And if you want autonomy, you also have to take the responsibility that comes with it. How autonomous would you say is Cabin DAO at this point? Like, how much is it actually being driven by a small core group of people who are just like working and making decisions versus the big community that you guys have?
Yeah, I think Cabin is autonomous, but not in the way that people would think when they first come into a DAO. I think when we're still at a stage when we talk about decentralization, that everyone is in charge of their own work, or everyone kind of goes off and does their own thing. At Cabin, the way we've thought about this, and kind of straddling the line between doing really good work versus giving people the freedom, is initially we had guilds that were under the DAO. And whenever there was a job that needed to be done, it would go into the guilds. We had the product guild, the media guild, the placemakers for IRL events. And what we found that that previous structure of work actually needed to have a centralized place where all the projects were coming from.
Yeah.
So that made it very similar to a corporation.
Yeah.
There's like this huge centralized body that would say, okay, these are our metrics for this, like the quarter or the season, give it to the managers give it to their teams.
Right.
So at Cabin, we've thought about there's a difference between our community, the leisure in our community, the social part of our community, and the work part of our community. So right now, Cabin, our Discord is just purely for having fun, it's purely for sharing links, it's purely for connecting with other people who are into solar punk and builders and things like that.
Yeah.
And then people like me who are core contributors who work in the DAO, we are separate, what we call fellowship. If I was to map it out, and let's say right now there's maybe two fellowships, the one that does our podcast and the fellowship that I'm in, which is what we call the Developing Neighborhoods Fellowship, or the first fellowship. It's almost like we are nodes or nodes outside of Cabin that are just providing services to the DAO. So that's how we kind of make it autonomous. Our fellowship we have our own multisig. So then every month, the Cabin multisig just airdrops tokens or a compensation to our multisig, and then we have our steward who is who is John slash the co-founder of Cabin. Then he would kind of disperse our compensation among us, and then I'm also part of our multisig for the first fellowship. So if we want any expense payments and things like that, we just need 3 out of 6 signatures for the proposal or the request for funding to go through. So it's not autonomous in like the individual units of the contributors, but it's autonomous in we understand the goals that we want to create, and then everyone that wants to work on that goal will go towards one specific fellowship and work towards it.
Yes. Right. So on compensation, I think in the article you mentioned that how you get compensated as a core contributor is 50% of that is USDC and 50% of that is Cabin tokens. So you guys have drawn so much inspiration at Cabin DAO from, Balaji's network state. And he outlines, a network state, among many other things, is a community aligned around cryptographic consensus. So as much as we believe in the tech of crypto, it's extremely unstable and volatile. Can DAOs truly take care of people's immediate needs? Would be my question to you.
Yeah. So I would touch on the idea of the cryptographic tokens first, before we talk about how DAOs and then Cabin would take care of people's needs. Because right now, our token, you can't actually buy it from a liquidity pool anymore. We're using it solely for governance. And because what we found so far is that the speculation side of things really distracts us, distracts the community, distracts me as an individual contributor from
Absolutely.
the work of actually building the network city that we're trying to build.
Yeah.
In terms of how the DAO takes care of people immediate needs, going back to the question of accountability and responsibility and benefits and pros and cons, I think it's a two-way street of DAOs. Once they're asking someone to work for them, they have to understand that they have to create these structures so that people are taken care of. Have these conversations around compensation, of what's fair, of balancing putting food on the table with making sure that incentives are aligned with the community and with the contributor as well. So that's one side. The other side is as individual contributors who are working in Web3 or are starting to dabble in Web3, I think we should also be taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
In a way that we're thinking very actively about, one, the career that we're trying to build in Web3. Like, who are these people that I'm putting all this time into, and is this worth doing? And then at the end of the day, and saying, maybe for some DAOs, maybe I should just be volunteering my time and not working. Some DAOs, maybe I could be putting a little bit of my time into it. Even for me, when people talk to me about working at Cabin, and I would say that Cabin right now, like, we have a very small team in the first fellowship. We have 6 people, might grow into 8 max, and that'll be it for the next maybe couple of years. And so I think in the beginning of Cabin, a lot of people wanted to earn bounties and work for us and turn this into a career. And something that I've been telling people is Cabin might not be the way you become full-time in Web3. It might be a more financially inclined community or a DeFi community. But for us, we could be, like, let's say, almost like having an Apple on your resume or a Meta, where if you're a contributor to Cabin, it opens doors for other opportunities very easily. So instead of saying, okay, you can be full-time in Cabin, and that's the way, full-time in Cabin and full-time in Web3, that's the way to go. I would just encourage people to say, in Cabin at least, contributing at Cabin is a very good almost line on your Web3 resume, and we should leave it at that, and that'll help open doors for you being full-time in Web3 somewhere else. So I think that's me personally setting expectations for people who come into Cabin and wanting to work. And that's also the way I think about it myself, of Cabin, I get paid, I get compensated, but I'm still kind of developing my own skills outside of the skill set that I'm offering to Cabin. I'm still developing my own interests, career-wise, outside of even Web3. So yeah, both ways. If you're in a DAO and you have almost the influence in the DAO to be able to take care of people, I think there's a responsibility to do that. As individual contributors, we also have a responsibility to ourselves to almost actively guide our own career. And that is both one of the great blessings and also the difficult parts of the age of the future of work that we're starting to walk into.
Absolutely. I have so much respect for that perspective, and props to you. I think that is such a incredible way to develop your mindset. Is we very easily can blame DAOs like, oh, they're not unstable, they're not stable enough to, like provide food on the table. But like you said, you have to like actively decide where your career is heading. And you spoke about how so much of your routine is based on, Paul Graham's maker manager schedule, which basically for people who might not know, maker manager schedule is like, there are managers who have a certain kind of schedules and there are makers. Makers are like creators, programmers, writers, right? Managers like get on lots of like one-on-one meetings and speak with people and build relationships. And that's okay. But if you're a maker and if you're a creator, you can't really do like deep work when you're constantly like interrupted by people or messages. Or if you know that in the afternoon you have a meeting to take up, you might not start with a super ambitious project. And that doesn't happen with like 1 hour or 2 hour of a blocker time that sometimes take 4, 5, 6. So maybe Roxine, I think I'd love for you to dive more into is how you spoke about, this mindset that you've developed to really actively direct your career. I think it's super important for a lot of us to hear as a contributor.
Yeah, is a question around the maker manager schedule or just going a little bit deeper into the ownership and stuff like that?
How you were influenced by the maker manager schedule and how you decided, like that was just a part of the way you are directing your career, right?
Yeah, I think with a maker manager schedule, so I work in growth in Cabin, basically growth, marketing, all my responsibilities are basically content marketing, product marketing,
right,
and growth at the same time. And if I'm doing content marketing, that's more maker side. If I am doing product marketing, that's both talking to people and then kind of reflecting on what folks are telling me about what they need and how our product can kind of meet them halfway. And then with growth, it's definitely a lot more just getting into things, getting my hands dirty, figuring out what new channels are going to work for Cabin to grow. So I think day to day, it's really hard for me to say, okay, maker, I'm doing maker for 2 hours, manager in the afternoon, which is like basically the ideal. What I'm learning right now is actually I'm learning to context switch a lot better. Of if I have a meeting for 30 minutes and I have, let's say, a block of 1 hour between the next meeting, then I just have to be really good at getting focused there. I still try to hold off on doing meetings in the morning. It's 10:30 at my time right now. This is like an exception. Most of the time I don't.
Well, I appreciate it.
I would just have like 9 a.m. to like 11:30 or 12 as it might not necessarily be what Cal Newport defines as deep work, but it would just be focused work on the project that I need to get done. In the afternoon is me connecting with people, moving things forward, talking to contributors if they need any help and things like that. Actually, on top of the maker manager schedule, one way I think about my career is having 10% time, which is a little bit less than what Google does with their 20% time. So for those who don't know, folks at Google, I don't know if they still do it, but they had this program where everyone could, I think it's just engineers, or I'm not sure if it's engineers or everyone, but their employees can take 20% of their time to work on any project of their choosing. So that could be 8 hours on a Friday, or maybe 2 hours on Tuesday, like 4 hours, 6 hours on Thursday, something like that. So for myself, I do 10% time, which is 4 hours, usually on a Wednesday afternoon. And this is when I think more creatively about where do I want my career to go. Maybe I read a book that's been sitting on my shelf for a while that's not related to work, or even talk to folks outside of Web3 to learn about what is going on in the industry, how are people perceiving Web3. And sometimes maybe it's just like picking up a new skill like software development or like starting to dabble in that and doing a coding course. So I think with a maker manager schedule that helps me get focused work done, and also connect with the rest of the team, because I actually do like talking to people and having meetings, but I just have to, calibrate it to make sure that I still get my work done. And then also having that 10% time of, that's kind of where I exercise the autonomy in my career of I can do whatever I want with those 4 hours. It doesn't have to be a project that is in front of me, a cabin related Web3 project.
That's amazing. Everyone has 24 hours in a day, and it's baffling to see what some people can do with it and, how limiting some people can feel it is. And I feel like schedules like these and markers like these, I feel like can really, really change the trajectory of how you are utilizing your time. And very funnily, you said on the side you like to work on software development. That's awesome. I think just going around compensation again. So, how is it that Cabin DAO is building on their treasury to reward their contributors?
Could you rephrase the question? I don't think I grokked the whole thing.
Yes, for sure. Around compensation. So, you guys are actually compensating your contributors, right? And it's not just in terms of cabin tokens, but it's like real money, like USDC. So, how is it that you guys are building on your treasury?
So how we built our treasury?
Yeah, like do you how organizations are funded? Do you already have a treasury? Like how is it? Where is that money coming from? Which is helping you sustain and pay your contributors?
Yeah, we did 2 rounds of treasury diversification at Cabin. Anyone here can check out our snapshot. The first treasury diversification, I think the Cabin token is valued at 25 USDC per token, and then we did another round earlier this year, and we were valued at 35 USDC. So a bunch of our strategic partners from the first treasury diversification thought that we were still doing really good work even through the bear market, and really wanted to support Cabin in second round. So that's basically where our treasury comes from, or has come from.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of because DAOs are such an ambiguous space, and I feel like people who are new in this space don't really understand how does it all work. So I feel like that's why I felt like that question would be super interesting for the audience. Jumping on to the topic of tech stack, I love how, John Hill, the co-founder of Cabin DAO, wrote in his article and compared decentralized cities to computers. And he said, decentralized cities too have hardwares and softwares like computer. Hardwares being physical land, physical space like land, infrastructure, and buildings, and software being like in cooperation, on-chain governance, and off-chain social interactions, like basically your community hanging out on Discord. So the software aspect of decentralized communities is where tools play such an important part. So what are some DAO tools that you are exclusively using to serve your community? I would love to know.
Well, everyone knows Discord, so our community is still on Discord. I would say our tech stack is, we actually have a very Web2 tech stack. My background is in marketing and Web2, so I'm very comfortable working through that. With our first fellowship, our marketing calendar, it's on Asana. We use Google Docs. We have G Suite. In terms of the Web3 side of things, we use Snapshot for our proposals. Our treasury, I believe, is on Gnosis Safe. We are testing out, so we're currently testing out this almost group, almost like a Discord, but for just smaller groups. It's called Geneva. Don't use this as a recommendation for Geneva yet. We're still testing that out, figuring out a way to both divide the work and the personal, or not personal, but the social side of Cabin. As I mentioned before, we're a fellowship, so we're just like service providers for the DAO, while still giving people transparency, being able to see what we're talking about as a fellowship. So Geneva is one of those tests. We are currently, there's still some of our bounties that are on Clarity. So Clarity, we found that it's good for tracking bounties for DAOs. But for us, we are trying to test out like Google Docs, just like almost like quote unquote normal Web2 tools.
Yeah. Perfect. Just to do a fun exercise, I have a map of all the, the famous DAO tooling landscape. And I'd love for you to maybe, like rate your top 3 DAO tools and roast your top three DAO tools. So that I think it's just like fun. Perfect. Your top three tools and three tools that you would roast.
Ooh, okay. Top three tools. Actually, I'm a huge personal knowledge management nerd. So I would say top three on that upper right. Obsidian. I use that all the time. Evernote's not here, but maybe it's not too updated enough. So I use Obsidian a lot. The second one, top second. I would say Gitbook actually. So on the side, I'm currently building out almost like a Cabin handbook to onboard contributors, to give people a bird's eye view, pull everything together about Cabin, put it into a little Gitbook website. I like that's just side project, so I really enjoyed using Gitbook to make it clear for people to navigate. So Obsidian Gitbook, pretty good. Let me see. I think Figma actually in the middle. So I'm basically picking really good Web 2 tools, not just Web 2 tools, because I think the work we're doing right now, we just need stuff that works really well. So
Absolutely.
Obsidian, Gitbook, Figma, definitely share, like our current website, we just went through a website redesign. Figma has been super helpful for that, for their branding and stuff. Bottom three, it's so tough.
You have to roast them.
Have to roast them. I, let me see. So the one that I use the most often is Mirror. I love the Mirror team. I'm sorry if anyone's in Mirror here. I'm friends with Rafa. But I think the writing experience on Mirror is just hit and miss. I post a lot of the articles for Cabin on our Mirror, and they've come out with so many good features, like being able to subscribe. Even I think capturing emails is something on the roadmap, but just like the process of copying pasting from Google Docs to Mirror has taken a little bit more time than I need, or that it should. Let me see. Actually, I'm gonna throw out a very polarizing view, but Notion.
Wow.
I just use a bunch of different tools to basically do what Notion does instead. So I would rather I don't want to have to create the databases, the pages and all the structure. So for my task management, I have like Todoist. For the team, it's Asana. So I just have everything that works together by themselves versus having one Notion workspace for things.
Yeah.
It just like gets in the way of getting the work done if I have to fiddle with formulas and pages and figure where everything else is.
Right. Okay, last
The
one.
last roast, of course, it is Discord.
What?
It's just like honestly, Discord was not really meant to run a DAO. Discord is just the best tool that we have currently, and it just kind of grew from the gamer space. And I guess with the pandemic that happened, and also just like as Web3 crypto people, we love the lore, we love LARPing. Half of us are probably playing video games on the other side of the time, like the other half of the time. So Discord was just a really good tool for gamers and for people with small communities, friends to hang out. And then now we're trying to build these autonomous, decentralized communities on Discord, and then it continues to break. So, Discord, especially if it's not cleaned up.
Perfect. I know how painful that was for you, but I appreciate you doing it. Amazing. That was great. Can we switch back to our Zoom screen share so people can see us?
Yeah, I think I should.
Guys, we have one community questions. If anyone else has to ask, we'll be super happy. Roxanne, before we jump on to the community question, I think since we're on the DAO tooling topic, what would you say is one of the biggest points you're facing in terms of all your operations in a DAO? And if you had to pay like $1 million to solve a problem in your DAO operations, what would that one problem be?
I think the knowledge management in a DAO is a huge thing. I think folks can search up in our Mirror blog. There's this, I think it's called the DAO Management Tooling Landscape or something that John and I wrote maybe a year ago. And even now, we're still trying to find the right tools for what we call doing multiplayer in a DAO, or figuring out, okay, what is information that is great for the community, what is information that maybe it's just useful for contributors versus what information is good for maybe someone who doesn't even want to be part of the DAO, but just wants to come to IRL events at Cabin. So knowledge management, being able to disperse that based on someone's almost their level of reputation in the DAO, of number of token, maybe an NFT holding an NFT. That's been just a huge struggle for us. And there's a bunch of people who are building pieces of the tech stack. And I don't know if it would be a good idea to have one single almost software to solve all of those problems. So if I had $1 million, it would go one in two ways. One is either figuring out a monolithic, okay, this solves all the problems very well.
Yeah.
In a way, that's one side. The other side might be building a Zapier for Web3 apps. And yeah, right now it's pretty clunky. Like, okay, it's like all on the blockchain. I understand everything. Like, you can read everything, get all the information, but just having a Zapier that's a no-code tool would probably be really helpful. Like all of these.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Not the knowledge management, but when it comes to contribution, and, we are using so many different tools just to get one single job done, whether it's Snapshot, Gnosis, Notion, so on and so forth. At DaoLens, we're building a contribution tool where all the tools are just under one hub. But we're not here to talk about that. I'll share more information regarding that with you later. But last question around grants and around operations, and then we'll jump to the community questions, promise, guys, which is how are new ideas getting proposed with you guys? For example, say that you have to create 5 YouTube videos for Cabin for 1 ETH. You have 2 options. Option A is a person who is proposing the idea is also the creator. So we float the proposal, it gets approved, and the money gets granted. Or is it option B, where the idea is suggested by the core group and then it is listed as a bounty? Basically, the difference between option A and option B is option A, the idea and creators are coming from the same people, versus the idea is equal to community, versus the bounty is equal to creator in the second option. So how is it that you guys are operating with that?
I think both happens at Cabin. The foundation of that is the incentives behind our proposal process. So proposal process for Cabin is you need at least 1,000 Cabin for a proposal to go on Snapshot. And so, let's say for me, I'm a core contributor, I have 1,200 or something Cabin. So I can just create a proposal, put it on Snapshot, people vote on it. And I think Snapshot currently has a delegation feature. We've turned that on. So if someone has only, let's say they're a new community member, they only have 10 Cabin, they can find a bunch of other folks who have been around Cabin longer, which means that they have more Cabin token, and then get their feedback on the proposal that they want to do. Let's say these 2 people have 500 Cabin each. They accumulate all their Cabin. This person gets delegated 1,000 Cabin, then they can create a proposal themselves. So that's how the community can suggest and propose, proposals without having to go through a centralized body. And this also solves the problem of, maybe anyone off the internet can just propose something at Cabin. No, they actually have to go through this process of gathering context from people who have been at Cabin longer. So it's just built into the process because of this proposal process. On the other side, yes, so the fellowship, so for us, we're the first fellowship. There's going to be other fellowships around the Cabin, almost working network in the future. And we have bounties that are tied to our budget. So I mentioned earlier on this call that we have our own multi-sig. So we're basically like a team within like a corporation that has its own budget, and we can outsource work to freelancers / in Web3 that's creating bounties. So I think that's 2 ways of doing it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's super interesting to know how you guys operate. Because you are one of like out of like thousands of DAOs, I feel like Cabin DAO really sits there at the top. So it's really amazing to get these insights. Let's jump to the community question. We have Praful asking the question. Roxine, would you like to read it out?
Yeah, the question is, Cabin tokens are not available in market. How is the token pricing decided, and how do you liquidate the compensation? That's a very good question. It's a very hard question to answer because right now there's no way to liquidate people's compensation if they only get paid in Cabin token. And that's why we began paying USDC and Cabin. And it's a conversation, a negotiation between someone who's doing the bounty versus what the budget, let's say, for the fellowship is, or what the DAO is able to pay. So that's the short answer to that. Like Cabin token, right now, there's no way to liquidate it. And how is the token pricing decided? That's based on our treasury diversification. Since now we don't have our liquidity pool, the way people can just put a number on the token is what happened in our treasury diversification. So first treasury diversification, it was at 25 USDC per Cabin. The second one, it was at 35. And that is people actually putting USDC into treasury, and then you receive Cabin for that amount. So that's currently the way to do it. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, I would say, because someone owns Cabin, they are not able to really withdraw the cash. But that's something that I usually talk to folks who want to be contributors about, or being very honest about. Well, we really value people being values on the community, but yes, we also want to have it on the table.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering that. We have a next question from Aurora. I do not know how to pronounce that last name. Sorry, but you can take it up.
What would you say are the top 2 or 3 pain points you're facing in terms of managing, writing, and community? Actually, the word managing is the pain point. I think a lot of us, when we come from Web 2, we have a lot of overhead we have project managers, we have project coordinators, making sure everything's running smoothly. Basically, people who are maybe not working in the project specifically, they're not individual contributors, as we like to call it, but they're people managers. They're trying to serve as the glue between people. So I think being able to balance that of how do we take care of people, making sure that everything is coordinated, communicated, the project is running at the quality and under budget and under the timeline that we want, while also giving people autonomy. So at Cabin, we think of it it's almost like there's this triangle with the 3 points being permeability, autonomy, and quality. And in a community, if it's super permeable, then people are able to do work, but maybe they don't have the context, so then quality would go down. If quality goes down, then autonomy, there will be some people who feel the need to talk to this person and say, okay, please don't do this or do this better, and almost basically manage them. So I think balancing that triangle of how easy is it to get work, to get new work, or to put your proposal through, or get that bounty. Autonomy, how much freedom does someone have to solve a problem within the community? And the third is quality of how well does the solution solve the problem the community is trying to solve, and also the general quality of a piece of work, let's say an article, how well written is this article? So that is, I think, one really big pain point that hopefully covers the top 2 or 3, because it's something that we continually just ping pong around.
Right. Thank you so much for taking up those questions, and thank you, community, so much for putting in those questions. Roxanne, about partnerships, have you guys? I don't know why, whenever I look at the gorgeous cabins that you guys have, I can only think about the exotic properties at Airbnb. So did you guys ever think about partnering up with like Airbnb or someone?
That's so it's almost like a yes and a no. If I don't know if people will be familiar, but with Cabin, we're trying to balance the scalability of, let's say, an Airbnb, or if some of you here are digital nomads, you might have heard of Selena.com. They're similar to Airbnb, but more catered towards remote workers and digital nomads. So those models are super scalable.
How do
They're
we
trying
spell
to be
that?
hotels. Selina, SELINA.com. So they're trying to be very scalable solutions to the problem of accommodations when you travel. So it's an SEL.
Oh, my bad.
Um,
I apologize.
and but then there's the other side of intentional communities, co-living communities that are super not scalable because they have such a personalized and very deep culture. So with Cabin, we're trying to be in the middle of, yes, we have these cabins, we have these beautiful cabins that people can stay in, maybe just as good as the ones you can find at Airbnb. But also, what about the social aspect of it? What about the community aspect of this one specific neighborhood? Um,
Yeah.
so, in partnering up with, the reason I give that context is because we have a bunch of folks who would come to us who have tried being Airbnb hosts, but they don't like that revolving door of people. They don't like not being able to talk to the people staying at their place. Maybe they've had a bad experience with folks who basically trashed their beautiful property because they just don't feel like it's theirs.
Yeah.
So we've had these folks, and if they work with Cabin, it's almost like, yes, it's not just a revolving door of roommates and housemates and guests. It's people in the community who maybe share the values of the host, or what we call caretakers, and might even want to help them develop their property. So that's something that we've done, is folks doing build weeks and helping build a sauna in neighborhood zero. And you don't really get that with Airbnb. So on one hand, on the surface, it looks similar, of like we have places that people can live in. But on the deeper side of things, there's the community aspect as well.
Have the logistics ever been extremely painful? Like you have two personas of people, right? Like you have caretakers, people who are taking care of these property, and then you have residents who live and co-live together. Did you ever have like crazy, like, because these are real people you're dealing with and these are real properties that you're dealing with. So did you ever have like trashing a property or people fighting and stuff? Like, how was that something if you guys ever had to deal with?
So far, we haven't had people fighting, but because Cabin was we ran it as a retreat, like almost like a retreat place for Web3 organizations for the first half of this year. Yeah, there were some folks who didn't treat the property as if it was their own. They treated it more of as an Airbnb. So that was like a few of the struggles that we went through. So yes, we have experienced that as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, Roxine, it was such a pleasure to get to talk to you. And thank you so much for being super transparent and sharing so many valuable insights. Guys, if you want to be in touch with Roxine, you can follow her on Twitter. And by all means, you should follow her blog and newsletter. I'm going to drop all the links in the chat below. I think she's been writing an amazing amount on what it means to be a contributor at a place like Cabin, and otherwise also being a full-time employee at Web3 and so many other aspects of life, right? Roxine, any ending thoughts?
Just that if anyone here is looking for a community, doesn't have to be Web3, then feel free to drop into Cabin. We just have these, so we're starting to do dinners as a way for people to get IRL cabins. We're testing that. I would love to see some folks from here in those dinners. Then we also have build weeks, 1 to 2 weeks. You can help us build a bathhouse, tiny houses on neighborhood zero, get some photos in and be in like it's almost like a mythical Web3 place right now. So many people talk about it, but so few people have
Actually, yeah.
their boots to the ground on it unless they're in Cabin. Yeah, so I'd love to see folks in the Cabin community and IRL over dinner or pasta or just building in real big chainsaws.
That's amazing. Where can we find all these upcoming events' information?
Yeah, so folks can go to cabin.city. I can drop the link here.
That'll be perfect.
So cabin.city/join, you'll receive the newsletter, and I write that every single week, and that's where we send both updates on what's happening on the properties and also opportunities for people to sign up for future events. Some offer for everyone here. We are thinking of having a couple of almost test events for new neighborhoods. I think there's a Portugal one that might be happening in the Azores. So that's super cool. I don't know if it's Azores or Azores. We might have a few other ones in Central South America as well. So that's going to be fun for 2023. And you guys will be the first to hear about it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Do you guys ever have struggle with visa issues and stuff with people traveling all over the place?
So far, no, but we have started receiving questions about living in the cabins for a longer period of time. Yeah, and figuring out visa issues from there. I'm Canadian, so I can't, I think, live in the US for maybe, I think, up to 6 months in a year. I'm not sure. So we're still slowly starting to figure that out. But so far, people have been figuring out their own visa issues by themselves.
Okay, got it. That's perfect. Well, Roxy, it was lovely, lovely, lovely having you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you so much, everyone in the community, for joining. Appreciate you guys. Hope you loved our space. Please stay tuned for the Monday space. We have Weiju from Uniswap hopping on. So I'm sure it's going to be an amazing conversation. Have a lovely weekend. And Roxy, it was a pleasure. Thank you so, so much. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.